Hello and welcome to a new second prize, a motorcycle racing game for the Amiga, and I'm just showing off the 6 different races you can choose from. You can change the name when you select them, so don't worry too much about what they are called, if that could potentially be an issue. They each have a different traits in acceleration speed, curve handling, and their own health and motorcycle health. And each of the different races play very differently. There is a massive difference between them. I was half tempted to show it off, but I decided against it. But anyway, doing the season, you are always through 20 different tracks. The other option you have is to train on the different tracks. You don't have any option to drive individual races or anything else. It's training or season mode. And as you probably noticed, we had the option to choose automatic or manual gears and mouse sensitivity, because this game is controlled exclusively by mouse. You do not have an option to play with keyboard or joystick, which is going to be a daunting prospect for certain people, especially if they sit with a hypersensitive mouse. On to the game itself. As you can quite clearly see, this is a 3D game, and I know compared to modern day 3D graphics this is probably laughable, but there was a time when this was considered to be cutting edge or close to cutting edge. A style that some people are bound not to like, and I personally am not necessarily the greatest fan of it, but I suppose it gives a more realistic approach than a sprite-based game. It is considered to be a half simulation. I would argue a quarter simulation, but we'll get into why in a moment. The thing is, you can see we are racing, of course, but besides having the 5 named competitors, you have a whack load of generic numbskulls on the tracks, probably to give it some sort of realism, but the real reason they were put in were to be mobile obstacles, and that is the only thing they are. Unlike some other games I could mention, looking at you, Lotus Esprit, these drivers are not whacking from side to side like complete idiots, but it could be a random coincidence that you tend to find 2 opponents in virtually every sharp curve, but it happens to consistently to be a coincidence, and I am not a fan of that kind of difficulty manipulation. Because not only do you have to navigate some rather daunting curves, and that is a challenge in and by itself, but you also have to navigate around 2 other, it's usually 2, can be 1 if you're lucky, but anyway, other drivers in those curves. Of course you can always slow down, but I mean, who slows down in a racing game? Let's face it, it's a racing game, it's not a walking simulator. But it becomes a nuisance, and some of the other tracks, of which there are 20, they have decided to put in obstacles, which of course makes it very realistic, because we all know that on well-established racing tracks they put in obstacles to make it more dangerous for the drivers to drive those tracks. I mean, that's makes perfect sense. And again, I mean, Lotus is more of an arcade game than anything else, and while I hate the obstacles in the Lotus games, I can tolerate them. But in a game that claims itself to be more simulation than arcade racing, I find it a very unwelcome addition to the game. Another thing I am not a fan of is the fact that because you can only drive a season, the season default to 5-lap races, and it may not seem so bad, but I mean, if you look at this race, or this track specifically, it is one of the longer tracks, yeah, but it takes about 12 minutes to drive 5 laps. And with a mouse control, with some random numbskulls on the tracks, that could be rather, for me, definitely, it's far too long. Having an option to select how many laps you would want to race, maybe not down to individual laps, but a setting of 3, 5, 10, whatever, would have been nice, but it is not the case. And if you look at the bottom right side of the screen, you will see 2 bars. One of them, the top one, is your driver's health bar, and the bottom one is your motorcycle's health bar. And if either of them are ever filled up, you are out of the race, obviously. Thankfully, only out of this race, they have magically scraped your motorcycle together and patched you up, so for the next race you are back in the saddle. But considering how easy it is by 1 or 2 mistakes to get to take so much damage that you are out of the race, for a game that plays with mouse control, and anyone who's ever used the mouse will know that you're playing and your mouse cord or whatever just feels out of place, and you just do a quick flip to get the mouse cord back where it's supposed to be, and then you have a racer that's kissing a wall, which is not very good for you, by the way. I assume you could always put that down to the simulation part, but the game is not simulation enough to justify it. The game is not so-called realistic enough, because of some of the odd additions, to justify having such an extremely punishing damage model. And until you get used to the mouse control, you will probably play quite a few races where you just crash out. And sometimes it will be your fault, sometimes you are trying to navigate a curve far too quickly, and other times you get hit from behind by one of the unnamed drivers that's caught up to you, which can happen. And sometimes you are navigating an extremely sharp curve, and one of those mobile obstacles just gets in the way, so you hit them, you start sliding, smacking into a wall or other hard object at the side of the track, effectively knocking your driver out. I would have been less against it if the races at least had an option to be shorter, but they are. Some of the tracks are very fast or very short compared, but still, for me this is far too long to sit on one track, praying that your mouse is behaving, praying that when you hit those very tight curves, that the numbskulls in the curves are in a position where you can actually get around them without having to do some massive mouse movements, which risk getting you face planted into a building instead. The racing itself, I mean, once you get used to the mouse controls, it is perfectly fine. For me though, over the years, I've been playing so many track racing games, and we are talking fixed track racing games. I'm much more keen on something like Need for Speed or Dirt or whatever they're called, where yes, they are basically fixed tracks, but they are not in a stadium track. And these kind of games, I just had my fill, to be honest, which means of course that my opinion of a racing game of this type is going to be perhaps more negative than it necessarily is justified to be. But the videos I put up are opinion based, and I am not claiming that my opinion is any more right or wrong than anyone else's. I'm just saying it's my opinion, and you are more than welcome to disagree with me. That's perfectly fine. But I just the prospect of going through an entire season felt insurmountable to me, and I had no intention of doing more than enough footage in order to make this one video. The sound design is fine, the music is okay, nothing spectacular, nothing bad. The engine sounds of the motorcycles could be a bit more manly, and I'm not saying that in a discriminating way. It's just roaring a bit more would be nice, but at least it doesn't sound like overtuned lawnmowers like Lotus, for instance. The variation of or the variety of the different tracks could potentially make for an enjoyable experience for someone who absolutely loves racing games. The different characters handling as differently as they do makes for a very different racing experience as well. Ray, which is a racer who's got the fastest acceleration by far and the second highest top speed, he may seem like a good candidate for racing, but Ray has this issue called curves. If you do not stand on, squeeze, whatever it is you have to do, the brakes before any curves, you will find that Ray is driving through the curves, but not necessarily the way it's expected to. Whereas someone like Michelle, which doesn't have the best acceleration, doesn't have the best top speed, she can basically navigate in those curves at at her top speed. She will lose some speed, but not as dramatic as some of the other racers, so all the tracks can definitely be won with all the racers. In that regard, the game is fairly well balanced. It just can feel like some of them has an unfair advantage, but trust me, you can catch up to them. And as you can probably see on this track, I am quite a bit ahead of the other drivers. I will actually win by nearly a minute compared to the last racer. But all in all, no second prize. It's not bad, but I've just had enough of these kind of games. You have an option to save, but as I'm going to be showing just before ending this video, you have 8 save slots per season. So in order to apparently keep it more exciting, but that means that you will have to do 2 or 3 races if you want to save somewhat regularly. And for me, it's just too long, way too long. So the result screen. I did the fastest lap, so I get to put my name on, which of course is only temporarily because it doesn't save that. I would assume it saves it if you actually save the game, but I never bother trying. And the points rewarded for the different positions. The winner gets 3, then 2, then 1, then 0, then -1. So losing, being the 6th position is not great. But not much more to say about this game than what I already have said, so thanks for watching, take care, see you next time, bye bye for now.